The 11 most hated gospel legends. Hatred in gospel does not always begin with a crime. Sometimes it starts with one forbidden rhythm, one controversial sermon, one broken marriage, or one voice daring to challenge traditions guarded for generations. In a world built on faith, even change can feel like betrayal. Under the church lights, these legends looked anointed, respected, and untouchable. Their songs healed wounded hearts and filled sanctuaries. But behind the applause were public scandals, private contradictions, cultural battles, and decisions that divided congregations, while painful truths remained hidden beneath carefully protected reputations. Today on Black Hollywood Uncut, we are pulling back the curtain on the 11 most hated gospel legends. Stay until the very last second, because the final stories reveal how quickly praise can become outrage. Subscribe to Black Hollywood Uncut and hit the notification bell. Mahalia Jackson died, age 60 in 1972. Mahalia Jackson carried gospel music beyond the church walls, without ever abandoning the faith that gave her voice its power. Born in New Orleans and raised in a deeply religious Baptist household, she moved to Chicago as a teenager and sang in storefront churches while supporting herself through ordinary jobs. Her early years offered little glamour, but they gave her music the weight of real struggle, endurance, and conviction. Her breakthrough came with "Move On Up a Little Higher," a recording that sold millions and helped prove gospel music could reach a national audience without becoming secular entertainment. Songs such as "Take My Hand," "Precious Lord," "How I Got Over," and "Trouble of the World" made Jackson the most recognizable gospel singer of her generation. Her voice was enormous, but never careless. Every growl, pause, and rising phrase sounded rooted in worship rather than performance alone. Yet her success created tension inside parts of the religious world. Some church traditionalists believed gospel belonged only in sanctuaries, not concert halls, television studios, international festivals, or prestigious secular venues. Jackson's appearances before presidents, foreign audiences, and mainstream listeners made critics fear that sacred music was becoming entertainment. She also absorbed elements of blues phrasing and jazz timing, even while refusing lucrative offers to record conventional secular songs. The backlash was real, but describing her as hated would distort the story. She was challenged by gatekeepers because she expanded gospel's reach, not because she abandoned its message. Jackson also understood that faith could not remain silent in the face of injustice. She raised money for the civil rights movement, worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and sang at the 1963 March on Washington. During King's speech, she reportedly urged him to tell them about the dream, helping inspire the improvised passage that became one of the most famous moments in American history. Mahalia Jackson died on January 27, 1972, after years of declining health. She was 60. Contemporary reports identified heart disease as the immediate cause. Her critics once feared she was carrying gospel too far from the church. History revealed the opposite. Mahalia carried the church with her, into concert halls, political movements, and the conscience of the world. Kirk Franklin, 56 age now. Kirk Franklin did not simply modernize gospel music. He challenged the invisible rules surrounding who could perform it, what it could sound like, and where it was allowed to go. Raised in Fort Worth, Texas, Franklin began playing piano as a small child and directing church choirs before reaching his teenage years. By 1993, his debut project with the family had become a landmark crossover success, introducing choir-driven gospel to listeners who rarely entered a sanctuary. Songs including "Why We Sing," "Stomp," "Revolution," "Imagine Me," and "Love Theory" fused traditional testimony with hip-hop rhythms, R&B production, spoken word urgency, and contemporary black culture. Younger audiences heard faith expressed in a language that felt alive. Many traditionalists heard something dangerously close to secular entertainment. Franklin was criticized for dancing, collaborating with mainstream performers, and appearing on stages where gospel artists had once been considered unwelcome. But musical controversy was only part of his public story. Franklin refused to maintain the polished image often expected from religious celebrities. He spoke openly about being abandoned by his biological mother, childhood trauma, family estrangement, therapy, and what he personally described as a past struggle with pornography. That vulnerability made his ministry feel more human, but it also attracted judgment from people who believed gospel leaders should display victory rather than expose weakness. In 2017, Franklin publicly rejected anti-gay remarks made by gospel singer Kim Burrell during a sermon. He argued that religious conviction should never become hatred or cruelty. The response earned praise from many listeners, but some conservative Christians accused him of compromising scripture and betraying another gospel artist. Franklin has also criticized hypocrisy, political manipulation, homophobia, and the church's failure to address mental health. Those positions have repeatedly placed him between two worlds. Some secular audiences still view him as too religious. Some church traditionalists consider him too worldly, too outspoken, or too willing to question religious institutions. Now 56, Kirk Franklin has earned 20 Grammy Awards and received the Recording Academy's Black Music Icon Award in 2025. His influence is no longer seriously disputed. The title, Most Hated, exaggerates his story. Franklin was not rejected because he lacked faith. He was challenged because he refused to present faith as untouched by rhythm, trauma, doubt, or cultural change. Every controversy carried the same deeper question. Must gospel remain frozen to remain sacred, or can it evolve and still tell the truth? Andraé Crouch, die age 72 in 2015. Andraé Crouch helped create the sound that gospel traditionalists initially feared, and later generations could no longer imagine worship without. Born in San Francisco and raised in Southern California, Crouch began writing sacred music while still young. He later formed Andraé Crouch and the Disciples, blending Pentecostal testimony with polished arrangements, memorable choruses, jazz harmony, pop structure, and rhythms drawn from the changing world around him. Songs including The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power, Through It All, Soon and Very Soon, and My Tribute became standards across racial and denominational lines. Their language was direct. Their melodies were accessible. Instead of requiring listeners to understand the traditions of one particular church, Crouch created music that could move from storefront sanctuaries to concert halls, college campuses, television studios, and international stages. That accessibility also created backlash. Some conservative church audiences believed drums, electric instruments, contemporary clothing, and polished studio production made gospel sound too much like secular pop. Crouch's work with mainstream stars deepened those suspicions. He arranged or directed vocals for projects involving Michael Jackson, Madonna, Diana Ross, Elton John, Quincy Jones, and other major entertainers. To critics, those collaborations blurred a sacred boundary. To Crouch, they carried gospel influence into places the church might never otherwise reach. The transcript portrays him as someone widely hated, but the reality is more precise. He faced resistance from traditionalists during gospel's cultural transition. He was not broadly rejected for personal scandal, criminal conduct, or abandoning Christianity. In fact, he remained a committed minister and eventually served as co-pastor of the church founded by his parents. Over time, the sound once called worldly became foundational. Crouch won 7 Grammy Awards, influenced artists across gospel, R&B, pop, and contemporary Christian music, and helped establish the vocabulary later used by performers such as Kirk Franklin. Choir textures and crossover arrangements that once triggered suspicion became normal elements of modern worship. Crouch died at a hospital in California on January 8, 2015, after suffering a heart attack. He was 72. His story reveals how religious traditions often resist innovation before adopting it. Andraé Crouch was criticized for carrying gospel beyond familiar walls. History remembers him for proving that the message did not become weaker when the sound grew larger. The music traveled, and the church eventually followed. Thomas Dexter Jakes Sr., 69 age now TD. Jakes built an empire by making faith sound urgent, personal, and impossible to ignore. Born in South Charleston, West Virginia, he began preaching to small congregations before founding the Potter's House in Dallas in 1996. The church eventually grew to tens of thousands of members, while his sermons, conferences, books, films, and television broadcasts turned him into one of the most influential Black religious figures of his generation. His breakthrough message, "Woman, Thou Art Loosed," addressed trauma, rejection, abuse, and emotional restoration in language that connected with women far beyond traditional church audiences. Jakes became more than a pastor. He became an author, filmmaker, entrepreneur, and global motivational brand. Supporters saw a visionary using modern media to carry Christian teaching into homes that conventional ministry could never reach. But the size of that platform also brought scrutiny. Critics questioned the wealth surrounding his ministry, his celebrity relationships, and teachings they associated with prosperity theology. Expensive events, commercial products, and the polished scale of the Potter's House led detractors to argue that spiritual encouragement had become inseparable from business. Jakes has resisted being reduced to the prosperity preacher label and has pointed to his church's work involving housing, education, prison outreach, and support for struggling communities. He also faced theological criticism. His Pentecostal background and past language concerning the nature of God generated debate among evangelical scholars, while his careful public positions on sexuality frustrated both conservatives and progressives. Yet disagreement is not evidence of corruption. The transcript presents no proven financial crime or criminal conviction connected to Jakes, making the description, "most hated," far more dramatic than the documented record supports. In November 2024, Jakes suffered a major heart attack during a church service. The experience led to a historic leadership transition. In 2025, he stepped away from daily senior pastor duties, passing responsibility to his daughter Sarah Jakes Roberts and her husband, Touré Roberts. He remained chairman, founding pastor, and spiritual overseer. At 69, TD, Jakes remains a symbol of both Black church influence and religious celebrity. To admirers, he turned wounded lives toward purpose. To critics, he showed how easily ministry can grow into an empire. His legacy rests inside that tension between service and branding, sacred authority and public power. Priscilla Marie Winans, Love 61 age now. CeCe Winans became gospel royalty without needing scandal, spectacle, or rebellion to command attention. Born Priscilla Marie Winans into Detroit's celebrated Winans family, she first reached national audiences alongside her brother BB. Their polished harmonies blended gospel conviction with contemporary R&B, creating music that could move comfortably between churches, radio stations, award shows, and mainstream television. As BB and CeCe Winans, the siblings recorded songs including Heaven, Addictive Love, and I'll Take You There. CeCe later launched a solo career with Alone in His Presence, establishing herself as an artist whose voice carried both technical control and quiet spiritual authority. Alabaster Box, Believe for It, Goodness of God, and Never Lost became modern worship standards. Across her career, she grew into the best-selling and most awarded female gospel artist of her era, earning 18 Grammy Awards by 2026. Yet even CeCe's carefully grounded career drew criticism from some gospel traditionalists. Her closeness to mainstream artists, especially Whitney Houston, led critics to question whether gospel musicians should participate in secular entertainment. Their duet Count on Me, recorded for the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack, was a song about friendship rather than traditional worship. To some church observers, that crossover blurred a sacred boundary. CeCe never treated her friendship with Houston as something requiring apology. Whitney was more than a famous collaborator. She was like family, and CeCe became godmother to Bobby Christina Brown. When Houston died in 2012, CeCe sang at her funeral, carrying their private bond into one of music's most painful public moments. The transcript also frames television work and mainstream visibility as reasons she was disliked. But there is little evidence that CeCe was ever broadly hated. She maintained one of gospel music's cleanest public reputations, avoided major public feuds, and repeatedly returned to worship-centered recordings. The criticism surrounding her was less about misconduct than an old argument within gospel, whether sacred music becomes compromised when it reaches audiences outside the church. At 61, CeCe Winans remains one of gospel's most respected voices. She did not cross into mainstream culture by hiding her faith. She carried it openly. Critics feared the world might change the message. Her career demonstrated that the message could enter the world and remain unmistakably gospel. Shirley Caesar Williams, 87 age. Now Shirley Caesar's voice has never sounded like background music. It sounds like a warning, a testimony, and a sermon fighting to break through the walls. Born in Durham, North Carolina, she began recording while still a child, and later joined Albertina Walker's legendary group, the Caravans. By the time she launched her solo career in the 1960s, Caesar had already learned how to turn a gospel song into an emotional drama. Recordings such as No Charge, I Remember Mama, Hold My Mule, and Jesus, I Love Calling Your Name made her one of the most recognizable figures in Black gospel history. Her performances combined singing, preaching, storytelling, and explosive audience interaction. She could begin with a quiet memory, build through a biblical lesson, and end with an entire sanctuary on its feet. But Caesar's influence never remained confined to music. She became a pastor, humanitarian, and elected public servant. From 1987 to 1991, she served on the Durham City Council, advocating around education, housing, and the needs of working families. That decision drew criticism from some church traditionalists, who believed a gospel singer and pastor should avoid politics. Others questioned whether public office would weaken her spiritual focus. The controversy was never about corruption. It was about boundaries. Could a woman preach, perform, lead a congregation, enter politics, and still be accepted as authentically gospel? Caesar answered by continuing all of it. Her activism followed a long Black church tradition, in which faith was not separated from community survival. Even her later viral fame created tension. A remixed line from Hold My Mule, the famous beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes passage, became a social media phenomenon. Younger audiences laughed, danced, and rediscovered her music. Some listeners worried that a sacred performance had been reduced to a joke. Caesar, however, recognized that the remix had introduced her ministry to a generation that might never have heard the original sermon song. Now 87, Shirley Caesar remains one of gospel's most honored living legends, with a career spanning more than 7 decades and numerous Grammy, Dove, and Stellar awards. Calling her hated distorts the truth. She was challenged because she refused to remain in one approved role. Shirley Caesar carried gospel into politics, popular culture, and public service, and proved that ministry could speak from the pulpit while still confronting the world outside it. Yolanda Adams, 64. Age now, Yolanda Adams carried gospel music into mainstream America without raising her voice in apology. Born in Houston, Texas, she worked as a school teacher and part-time model before leaving education to pursue music full-time. Her early recordings revealed a voice built for both sanctuary worship and polished contemporary production. Warm, controlled, and powerful enough to move beyond traditional gospel audiences. Her career changed dramatically with the 1999 album Mountain High, Valley Low. Songs including Open My Heart, The Battle is the Lord's, Be Blessed, and Never Give Up blended gospel testimony with R&B, jazz, pop, and adult contemporary arrangements. The album became a major crossover success and established Adams as one of the defining voices of modern gospel. That success also attracted suspicion. Some traditional church listeners believed her music had become too smooth, too commercial, or too closely connected to secular R&B. Her elegant fashion, mainstream television appearances, award show performances, and collaborations outside conventional church spaces led critics to question whether she was protecting the sacred character of gospel. Adams rejected the idea that ministry had to remain inside a sanctuary. Her nationally syndicated radio program combined gospel music with conversations about family, wellness, culture, relationships, and everyday life. To supporters, this expanded the reach of faith. To detractors, it looked like ministry becoming lifestyle entertainment. Yet the transcript offers no major scandal, criminal misconduct, or abandonment of gospel belief. The backlash surrounding Adams was primarily about crossover and presentation. She did not remove spiritual messages from her work. She placed them inside sophisticated arrangements, capable of reaching listeners who might ignore a traditional church recording. Her longevity has strengthened that argument. In 2024, Adams released Sunny Days, her first studio album in 13 years, returning with the same blend of inspiration and contemporary production that had defined her breakthrough. She later expanded into acting and made her Broadway debut in Alicia Keys' musical Hell's Kitchen, proving that her voice could enter another major cultural space without losing its identity. Now 64, Yolanda Adams has earned 4 Grammy Awards and remains one of the most successful contemporary gospel artists of all time. She was never truly one of gospel's most hated figures. She became a target for a familiar fear, the belief that reaching the world must mean surrendering to it. Yolanda Adams built her career by proving that grace could travel beyond church walls and still sound unmistakably like faith. Donald Andrew McClurkin Jr., 66 age now. Donnie McClurkin built his career by transforming private pain into public testimony. Born in Copiague, New York, he endured severe childhood trauma, including sexual abuse and the death of his young brother in a traffic accident. Church music became a refuge. After working with choirs and serving under gospel leader Marvin Winans, McClurkin emerged as a solo artist whose powerful voice carried both vulnerability and spiritual authority. Songs such as Stand, We Fall Down, and Great Is Your Mercy became gospel standards. His live recordings crossed denominational and national boundaries, while his preaching reinforced an image of survival through faith. McClurkin earned 3 Grammy Awards and became one of contemporary gospel's most commercially successful male artists. Yet the testimony that strengthened his connection with conservative Christians also created lasting controversy. McClurkin publicly discussed experiencing same-sex attraction, which he connected to childhood abuse and exposure to pornography. He claimed prayer and personal will had enabled him to reject homosexuality. LGBTQ advocates argued that this message promoted the harmful idea that sexual orientation could be changed through religious intervention. The conflict intensified in 2007 when McClurkin joined Barack Obama's Embrace the Change gospel tour. Civil rights organizations criticized the campaign for featuring a performer who had described homosexuality as sinful and changeable. Obama's team added an openly gay minister to the program, but McClurkin still performed, leaving both sides dissatisfied. In 2013, he was removed from a concert marking the anniversary of the March on Washington after organizers feared his participation would divide the event. His public story became more serious in January 2026, when a former personal assistant filed a civil lawsuit accusing McClurkin of years of sexual abuse. The complaint alleges misconduct during a relationship that began with spiritual counseling. McClurkin's attorney has categorically denied the allegations. No court has determined that the claims are true, so they must remain clearly identified as allegations rather than established fact. Now 66, Donnie McClurkin remains both celebrated and deeply debated. His music offered strength to millions facing grief and brokenness, but his teachings and the unresolved lawsuit have intensified questions about sexuality, pastoral authority, and accountability. He was not controversial because his voice lacked power. He became controversial because the healing he preached collided with people who believed his message had caused wounds of its own. Kimberly Jean Burrell, 53 age. Now Kim Burrell possessed the kind of voice that made other singers stop and listen. Born in Houston, Texas, she developed her gift inside the Church of God in Christ and emerged during the 1990s with a rare combination of gospel conviction, jazz phrasing, vocal control, and fearless improvisation. Her debut album, Try Me Again, introduced an artist who could stretch a single line into something unpredictable, intimate, and technically astonishing. Burrell became a favorite among musicians across genres, Stevie Wonder praised her talent, while artists including Kirk Franklin, Pharrell Williams, Mariah Carey, Frank Ocean, and Harry Connick Jr. sought her voice or influence. She was admired less as a conventional commercial star than as a singer's singer, a performer whose vocal choices could turn a familiar gospel song into an entirely new experience. But in late 2016, Burrell's reputation changed dramatically after video from a church sermon circulated online. During the sermon, she described homosexual behavior as perverted and warned of divine judgment. Her language was widely condemned as hostile toward LGBTQ people. Burrell argued that she was preaching against sin rather than attacking individuals, but she initially refused to apologize for the central message. The consequences moved quickly. Burrell had been scheduled to appear with Pharrell Williams on the Ellen DeGeneres show to perform "I See a Victory" from the Hidden Figures soundtrack. Ellen DeGeneres canceled her appearance. Pharrell denounced prejudice, while Hidden Figures star Janelle Monáe also condemned Burrell's remarks. The soundtrack recording itself was not erased, as the transcript implies. It was the planned television performance that was canceled. Burrell faced another wave of criticism in 2022, after comments delivered from a church stage appeared to mock people for their appearance, financial position, and vaccination status. She later apologized, acknowledging that her words had caused pain, and that an earlier statement prepared on her behalf had failed to express genuine remorse. Now 53, Kim Burrell continues to perform and retains admirers who consider her one of gospel's greatest living vocalists. Yet her mainstream image has never fully escaped the controversies surrounding her speech. Her story presents a difficult divide. Extraordinary talent can command admiration, but it cannot shield a public figure from accountability. Burrell's voice opened doors across gospel and popular music. Her words closed some of them just as quickly, leaving her legacy suspended between musical brilliance and the lasting consequences of what she chose to preach. Thomas Tyrone. Ty Tribbett, 50 age now. Ty Tribbett entered gospel music like a burst of electricity. Born into a deeply religious family in Camden, New Jersey, he learned keyboards as a child and grew up surrounded by Pentecostal worship. In 1996, he formed Greater Anointing, better known as GA, assembling relatives and friends into a choir whose movement, vocal power, and relentless energy challenged the restrained image many people still associated with gospel. Songs such as "Victory," "Everything," "If He Did It Before," and "He Turned It" made Tribbett one of contemporary gospel's most explosive performers. His concerts felt less like formal recitals and more like spiritual workouts, driven by sharp choreography, rock-inspired instrumentation, funk, hip-hop, and call-and-response preaching. Younger listeners embraced the freedom. Some traditionalists believe the spectacle pushed worship dangerously close to entertainment, but Tribbett's most painful controversy did not begin on stage. In 2009, he publicly acknowledged having an extramarital relationship with a woman connected to his choir. His wife, Shante Tribbett, later became involved with gospel rapper Truth, who had been a trusted friend and counselor to the couple. The overlapping betrayals became public, shaking two marriages and damaging the image of leaders whose music had emphasized faith, commitment, and spiritual discipline. Ty and Shante did not divorce, contrary to the original transcript. They reconciled, remained married, and later spoke publicly about the damage, forgiveness, and difficult rebuilding of their relationship. Tribbett did not present the experience as a heroic victory. He admitted that his decisions had wounded his wife, family, ministry, and reputation. His career eventually recovered. The album Greater Than earned him his first 2 Grammy Awards in 2014. Later projects, including The Bloody Win and All Things New, Live in Orlando, reinforced his reputation as an artist capable of turning personal collapse into urgent worship. He and Shante also became pastors of Live Church in Orlando. Now 50, Ty Tribbett remains influential, but his legacy carries an unavoidable contradiction. He preached victory while privately helping create devastation. Yet his story did not end with exposure. It continued through accountability, reconciliation, and the uncomfortable truth that restoration does not erase the harm that made it necessary. Eddie Lee Long died age 63 in 2017. Eddie Long built his authority through size, confidence, and the promise that faith could produce visible power. When he became senior pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Georgia in 1987, the congregation reportedly had only a few hundred members. Under his leadership, it expanded into a megachurch of roughly 25,000, complete with international broadcasts, celebrity visitors, political connections, and ministries aimed at young men. Long preached discipline, masculinity, financial success, and spiritual warfare. His tailored suits, luxury vehicles, and commanding stage presence reflected the prosperity-centered message surrounding his ministry. Supporters viewed those symbols as evidence that a black church could operate with national influence. Critics saw a dangerous concentration of wealth and authority around one charismatic leader. That image fractured in September 2010, when 4 young men filed separate civil lawsuits accusing Long of using his pastoral position to draw them into sexual relationships. The plaintiffs alleged that he cultivated their loyalty through employment, travel, money, jewelry, vehicles, and private attention after meeting them through church programs. They claimed the relationships developed within an environment where Long was treated not simply as a pastor, but as a spiritual father whose approval carried enormous power. Long denied the allegations through his representatives and told his congregation that he intended to fight them. However, the lawsuits did not proceed to a public trial. In 2011, confidential settlements were reached with the plaintiffs. The terms were not disclosed. That legal distinction matters. A settlement is not a criminal conviction, and no court issued a verdict establishing the allegations as fact. At the same time, the private resolution prevented the public examination Long had initially promised. For many former supporters, the unanswered questions became inseparable from his legacy. The scandal weakened New Birth's reputation and reportedly contributed to falling attendance and financial pressure. Long continued preaching, but his national visibility declined. His earlier opposition to homosexuality also intensified accusations of hypocrisy, although allegations concerning his private conduct must still be described as allegations. Eddie Long died on January 15, 2017, after what his church described as an aggressive form of cancer. He was 63. His supporters remembered charitable programs, mentorship, and the growth of a major black institution. His critics remember young men who said spiritual trust had been exploited. Long's story remains a warning about what can happen when religious authority becomes so powerful that accountability struggles to enter the room. Behind every controversy was a deeper struggle over faith, power, image, and change. Some of these legends were condemned for breaking tradition. Others faced backlash after private failures became public. In gospel, where audiences expect both talent and moral authority, one mistake can echo louder than a lifetime of songs. Yet controversy cannot erase the music they created. Their voices carried families through grief, filled churches with hope, and helped shape the sound of black worship across generations. Even when their choices divided audiences, their influence remained undeniable. The songs survived the headlines, and the legacy outlived the judgment. Which gospel legend do you believe was judged too harshly and whose controversy permanently changed the way you hear their music? Share your answer in the comments, like this video, subscribe to Black Hollywood Uncut, and hit the notification bell for more unvarnished stories behind the legends.